This video is brought to you by Ground News. Being the leader of the Conservative Party right now is a particularly unenviable job. Having spent 14 years leading the country, adapting to having virtually no power was never going to be easy, particularly when you have the lowest number of seats in your history. What's particularly hard is adjusting to the new reality of just not being that interesting to the national media and having to fight tooth and nail for as much coverage as possible. Kemi Badenoch has just not been that good at this. Last week she tried to attract attention by saying that net zero in the UK by 2050 was impossible. Clearly this was an attempt to win over those on the right that had abandoned the Tories for Reform UK. However, she made the announcement on the same day that the government announced their cuts to welfare spending. This was a sloppy decision from Badenoch, who all but guaranteed that her announcement would be buried by reporting on the welfare cuts. This comes amidst criticism that she's been a pretty bad communicator across the board, with small parties like Reform UK and the Liberal Democrats being far more successful at grabbing the attention of the media than Badenoch. The only real opportunity for her to have guaranteed media coverage. Her questions don't seem to be properly workshopped, with Starmer often being able to bat them away easily and provide a fairly simple quip that others can share online. Whatever the reason, the calls for her to go are getting louder, and with the local elections slowly but surely creeping up, there's a very real possibility that her colleagues call time and topple her over the summer. If this were to happen though, what would happen? Which of her colleagues are well positioned to take over? And ultimately, who has the most chance of leading the Conservative Party next? Last week, I interviewed UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer to ask him your questions about the UK's new plans to support Ukraine and European defence initiatives in the aftermath of Trump's recent actions. Watch the video now by clicking the link in the description. Now, whether Badenoch will be toppled will likely be determined by two things. First, whether she can improve her communication style over the next few weeks. A good start would be by announcing more policy, making more media appearances, and improving her performance at PMQs by pinning Starmer down more. A good opportunity for her here is the recent decision to cut public spending. The second will be whether she can put in a good performance at the local elections. Of the 24 councils holding elections, the Conservatives currently have a majority in 16 of them, and lead either a minority or coalition administration in 3 of them. Unfortunately, there's very little polling available for local elections, but so far things really aren't looking good for the Tories. In an MRP poll conducted by Electoral Calculus on the 14th of March, it was predicted that the Tories would win majority control of only 10 councils, with Reform behind them on 8 councils. Even more shockingly though, the same polling found that had Angela Rayner not delayed other local elections, Reform UK would have overtaken the Tories, taking 12 councils to the Tories' 11. So it seems that inadvertently Rayner has done a favour for Badenoch. Even this though probably won't save her. If this polling turns out to be broadly accurate, it would ignite a backlash against her from her Tory backbenchers, who would see it as a sign that she's made little headway in the polls, and that under her they're likely on track to lose the next election. In other words, this could be the spark that ignites yet another Conservative leadership election. If this were to happen though, who could take over from Badenoch? Well, as we see it, journalists are talking about a lot of possible replacements, but there are currently 4 candidates that are well placed to take over. Robert Jenrick, James Cleverly, Suella Braverman, and, controversially, Boris Johnson. So, let's have a look at these in turn. In a sense, Jenrick appears by far like the most likely person to succeed Badenoch. He received only a single vote less than her in the final round of the MP ballot in the Tory leadership election last year, demonstrating a high amount of support from his colleagues. In the public vote, Jenrick did relatively well, receiving 43.5% of the vote, to Badenoch's 56.5%. Since Badenoch became leader, he's been given the role of Shadow Justice Minister, a role he's used to try and build his profile. He's very active on social media, and seems to like making videos attacking the Labour government, particularly on the allegation that Starmer is presiding over a 2-tier justice system. Essentially, he's proving his right-wing credentials to a party that, he likely argues, wants a right-wing leader. And to be fair to him, it seems to be working. The most recent polling by Conservative Home claims that he's the most popular of the shadow cabinet among Conservative Party members, with a net satisfaction rating of plus 58.5. However, Jenrick isn't the only candidate from the leadership election last year who could succeed Badenoch. At one point in the leadership election itself, it seemed that James Cleverly could actually defeat Kemi Badenoch, but was unceremoniously knocked out after allegations of vote lending. His main appeal at the leadership election was his communication style. He was praised for his speech at the Conservative Party conference last year, in which he argued the party should be more normal if they wanted to win. In the speech, he pitched himself more as a centrist unity candidate who could fix the Tories' factionalism problem and put them in a position to lead. Perhaps if Badenoch is ousted, a unity candidate that could garner support from beyond the Tory party and is able to communicate well with it is exactly what's wanted. Alternatively, though, perhaps the Tories decide that what they need is a known right-winger, someone who won't just promise to be right-wing but has a track record of it, and could be trusted to move the party further right. If this is the case, then Suella Braverman would be another good candidate. As Home Secretary, she was known for being tough on immigration, an issue that's of particular importance to the Conservative Party at the moment. And lastly, we have Boris Johnson. Now, we should say off the bat that this is a bit of a rogue suggestion, and is probably more of a wish from the Tory right than actually practicable. But it is worth discussing, because he's still immensely popular among the membership, and if he's interested in the job, there's a good chance he'd get it. Many on the right feel that he was unfairly ousted as Prime Minister, and many are yearning for the 2019 era when the Conservatives were dominant in the polls. While it would require him to be parachuted back into Parliament via a by-election, assuming an ally steps aside for him, he'd almost certainly be the candidate to beat. All in all then, while there is an argument for each candidate taking over from Badenoch, barring a return from Johnson, it would seem that Jenrick really would be the person to beat. Anyway, as we mentioned earlier, Badenoch's announcement that reaching net zero by 2050 is impossible was covered by more than 45 sources. Interestingly, we know that more than 9 of these have been reported by the left, and 11 have been reported by the right. That's because this week's sponsor, Ground News, are experts on pulling back the curtain on media bias. Built by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news, they ingest over 50,000 articles from all over the world, and then organise each by story. For each and every story, you can see the number of reporting sources, where these sources lead on the political spectrum at an individual level and group level, compare the headlines of each source, and read each article all without ever leaving the app. But one of the best parts of the app is their comparison feature, which highlights specific differences in left-leaning and right-leaning reporting. For example, for this story, left-leaning outlets tended to focus on the fact that this appears to be a retreat, while right-leaning outlets highlighted the UK's dangerous dependence on China. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I think an app like this will only become more essential as the media landscape continues to evolve. If you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the unlimited access Vantage plan using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.